Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast here on a Tuesday, the Hey Mary Kay edition of the podcast. Minutes after we found out that the Browns and Steelers are going to play at 1 o'clock on Sunday at Acrisure Stadium, I guess is what it's called now. I got that right yesterday, as Ashley informed me. So, Mary Kay, we're going to do some questions from our Football Insider subscribers, and I want to start here with something about the defense, but not specific to Joe Woods. This comes from Anthony in Columbus. Hey, Mary Kay, would Andrew Berry consider an entirely different philosophical approach to rebuilding the defense? An emphasis on the D-line and producing pressure up front over speed and coverage?
Well, I do think that they have to be a little bit more versatile, and they found that out as the season went along. Instead of just having some of the smaller, shiftier linebackers that can cover tight ends and cover backs out of the backfield and really be focused on the passing game, they figured out along the way that they have to be able to stop the run. And that's why you saw the Reggie Raglins come on board. That's why Sione Takitaki was really starting to get some playing time, because these guys can stop the run. They're a little bit bigger, a little stockier, and they figured out that that's going to be necessary. And then we also heard Jason Tarver, the linebackers coach, talking about JOK needing to be, a little built up from a physical standpoint. So I think that there will be an emphasis on that in the offseason. I do think that they will add to the defensive tackle room with a significant acquisition there. And then from a philosophical standpoint, I've been thinking about this, and what I would do is I would keep Joe Woods. I have no idea if they will do that or not. I feel like the vibe seems to be leaning towards him not sticking around, but I would keep him, and then I would either hire an assistant head coach slash defense to help oversee it, or I would have somebody else on the defensive staff that would be, coming in to take on a larger role. So I would try to have there be some continuity, because as the season has gone along, they've started to play better and they're starting to come around and they're starting to get those takeaways. So I don't know if now is the time to shake everything up and change everything. But I do think change is probably afoot. I just don't know if it's really necessary to, shake the whole thing up.
Do you think that's something Joe would go for, or he'd be okay with? Because I think it would be tough for a lot of coordinators to, and look, the opposite option is we're going to fire you. So I guess he would be, but I could see it being tough for a coordinator to have his head coach say, hey, we're going to bring in somebody who's going to be kind of close to you in role. I would imagine that there would be some looking over his shoulder if the Browns did something like that. So would Joe be okay with that, do you think?
Once again, it depends on, what other opportunities you might have, how much you want to keep the job that you currently have, how comfortable you are with what they would be proposing. Again, I think I feel it, you feel it. The vibe seems to be a parting of the ways, almost seems inevitable, right? Does it feel that way to you?
It does. It really felt like it on Thursday when we talked to Coach Prefer and Coach Woods, and I think we're really gonna come away with a pretty good sense of things when we talk to these guys again this week, because it'll be like the last time that we're going to talk to them if they're actually gone. So I think we're really going to have a solid feel for that this week.
Yeah, I mean, and I've stated on this podcast and on our other podcasts that I wish they could find a way to keep some continuity on that defense with Joe Woods. And I think there were so many extenuating circumstances this season with all of the injuries and with a lack of just that building up through the middle of the defense so that they could stop the run. But yeah, I don't know. I think it would be hard in some cases to accept a little bit of a lesser role or a shared role or some kind of oversight in the process. But, it just depends. I mean, if Robert Saleh is going to hire him or somebody that he's worked with in his career, I mean, Joe Woods is pretty respected in NFL circles. And, he's got a lot of people out there that really believe in him. So if he has another opportunity, then he would probably be more reluctant to accept something like that. But I just don't think it would be the worst thing in the world for them to try to come up with some kind of an arrangement. Again, doubt it'll happen, but that's what I would probably do.
So we talk a lot about the defensive tackle position. I was thinking about this today. Another area where I think they kind of messed up this offseason was they never really found that third edge rusher. I thought Takk McKinley was really important to this team because he was a great fit as just the guy that came in on rushing downs. You know, they needed him to play. They needed him to start the one game without Clowney, and every now and again they would need him to play a little more. And he was fine in those spots. But just as that third edge rusher, he was so good for this team that year they brought him in. And this year they just, Alex Wright hasn't really done it. Isaiah Thomas can't even get active right now. Chase Winovich hasn't really delivered. I think they're missing that. And we've seen it this year with, we saw Miles miss time. We've seen Jadeveon miss time. I think that's an area, too, that along with defensive tackle, I really think they need to figure out. Obviously, they got to figure out what they're going to do with JD and at the number 2 spot. But then they've got to find that third guy on the edge, too. I think they really missed that guy this year.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think they thought that they had that guy with the combination of players that they acquired. They thought that maybe they could get 5 sacks out of Chase Winovich. They thought that Alex Wright was going to come in here and be able to get to the quarterback this year. Do you know how many sacks Alex has? I gotta look it up.
I would have to look it up. I don't think it's many.
Yeah. So I don't have my notes in front of me right at this very second.
I'm pulling up his Pro Football Reference right now. He has 0 sacks.
Okay. And Chase was that his first of the season? Was
that his first yesterday?
I think it was.
Monday. I think it might have been.
Okay. So if that is true.
Yes, that was his first.
Okay. So the combination of Alex Wright and Chase Winovich, and they were supposed to be your sort of, rotation Takk McKinley combo guy. They got 1 sack out of those 2 guys. 1. That's not enough. So you're right. They definitely need that guy. Unless they really believe that Alex Wright is going to come through and be that for them next year, then they're going to have to be looking for that. And that is why I'm so adamant that they need to re-sign Jadeveon Clowney. If you just looked at the plays in which he was on the field yesterday, he is a difference maker, especially in the run game right now. I mean, he still has the hustle. He still has plenty left in the tank, in my opinion. And I think Miles and Jadeveon are such a good team together. I wouldn't be breaking that up right now. It's going to be hard enough to get that third edge down. I certainly would not be, messing with the number 2. In my opinion, 11 games of Jadeveon Clowney per season, or 12, if you can get that out of him, is better than 17 games out of a lesser edge rusher. I would give him what he's worth. I think he's still worth a ton. He's such a smart player. The guys love him. Miles gets along with him. He compliments Miles. He wants to play with Deshaun Watson. I would do it. I wouldn't hesitate. I would do it and then try to figure out where you're going to get those other 5.5 sacks.
I don't think he would cost that much. He has 2 sacks this year. He's going to be 30 in February. It might be a situation where you've got to wait till June for him to actually just say, all right, fine, I'll sign for whatever. But I don't think he's going out there and getting like $10 million again. I could be wrong, but I don't think that would happen.
No, and what you can do, obviously, is, you can build those incentives into his deal. And if you remember, he ended up making like an extra $1 million in the final 2 games of last season, or an extra $750,000 in the final 2 games of last season with 4 late sacks. So I would do that again, help keep him motivated, give him something to get excited about and to play for. But I think with Deshaun Watson out there for the full season, I think Jadeveon Clowney will be very motivated to go out there and try to help this team get to the Super Bowl. And I think he's a key piece, and I don't think he's fallen off a cliff yet or anything like that. I still think he's got plenty enough left in the tank, and I'm just very adamant that they need to do that.
You and Ashley are going to talk me into this in about a month, for sure. I mean, I do genuinely believe he likes being here, and I think he likes his teammates, and I think he's really well liked on that defense.
Yes.
That's been one of the, being back in the locker room, you get to see these little glimpses, and it's not everything. It's only small windows of time, but you do get to pick up on some things. And I do genuinely believe that Jadeveon Clowney is a very well-liked guy in that room, sort of like Sheldon Richardson used to be.
Yeah, and he is, I wrote this the other day, and I can't remember exactly what the grade is, but his PFF ranking is still pretty high. I mean, I think he's like 24th or something like that amongst qualifying edge rushers. That's really high. I mean, we're talking about some players on defense and offense right now that are in the 100s, okay? So to be up in the 24s and to be playing at the level that he can play at, that's not bad. And if you can get him at a little bit of a bargain price with some really nice incentives for games played, games started, Pro Bowl, sacks, whatever the case may be, give him a little bit of extra upfront money. I would go ahead and I would do it. You just can't find Jadeveon Clowney out there for the taking, at least not for the price that you would be able to get him at.
Okay, so I didn't know it was this bad, and I would not have gotten this question right. I wouldn't have even come close. Myles Garrett leads the Browns with 15 sacks.
Yep.
Jadeveon Clowney is not one of these two guys. Who do you think are second and third on the team in sacks right now? One has 3 and the other has 2.5. And I wouldn't have even come close on this.
Yeah, I did. I looked this up the other day, and now I'm forgetting. Was one of them like Sione Takitaki or something?
No, but it is a linebacker. The third one is a linebacker.
Yeah. Tony Fields.
No. So Taven Bryan has 3 sacks.
Okay.
And Deion Jones has 2.5. I think Deion might have gotten one of those cheap ones on when a wide receiver was throwing the ball or something. I don't know. But yeah, it's been bad when it's come to, I know sacks aren't everything. They love pressures, but it's been pretty bad when it's come to sacking the quarterback outside of Myles Garrett. Okay,
Dan,
go ahead.
Think about this. Last year, Jadeveon had 9, but 4 of those came in those final 2 games. And that final game was a throwaway game against the Bengals backups. So Jadeveon's value doesn't necessarily come in sacks per se, but it does come in pressures, setting the edge, stopping the run, knowing where to be, and helping out Myles and taking a little bit of pressure off Myles. So, it is kind of weird that it goes from 15 and then it drops down, it plunges down to 3. That's not okay. They need 1 or 2 mid-tier guys in there that are going to get to the quarterback. And I wonder what the outlook is for Alex Wright. I wonder what they think about what he's going to be able to do going forward. You want your second-year guys to take a nice big leap up into that second year. And they're going to have to determine if he can do that.
Yeah, he's got some work to do. There's still, I think the physical traits are there for him, but he's got some work to do. And by the way, with JD, he's never been like a guy that gets a ton of sacks. I think has he even hit double digits in his career?
No.
He's never really been like a huge, like just pile up the sacks guy. 9.5 is his career high. He's gotten to 9 2 other times outside of that 9.5 year. So This is kind of who he is, but you do know, you notice him. You notice him when he's out there.
Yes.
And it's not just because he has awesome hair.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm a big fan. I'm a big JD fan.
So speaking of philosophy, there were some questions about Paul DePodesta, and we'll take this one from, I don't think this is a real name, but Danimal from Powell, Ohio. Hey, Mary Kay. I believe that Paul DePodesta is the biggest issue with the Browns. When are the Haslam's going to wake up and move on from him? 9 years of problems, and he is the common denominator. So I don't think it's been quite 9 years, but it's not that far off. He was hired when Sashi got hired, correct? So that would have been the year that Hugh Jackson came on. So 2016, we are getting close to 9 years.
Yeah,
7
that went
years,
fast.
7 or 8 years. Yeah.
Boy, where did those 7 years go? Right? Unbelievable. So my feelings and thoughts on Paul DePodesta, you know, people always want to have a problem with analytics and running the ball. I mean, the truth of the matter is if you run the numbers on the Browns running the ball, they're way up at the near the top of the league in terms of rushing attempts and, the balance between passing the ball and running the ball. And that might change next year. I think it will change with Deshaun Watson being the quarterback for all 17 games, or at least from the beginning of the season. It will probably be a little bit more pass heavy. But most of this year, even though what stands out in our minds is Kevin going for it quite often, or pretty much all the time, on 4th and short, they ran the ball more than anybody, I think, in the AFC, more rushing attempts possibly than anybody in the AFC. They were right up there. I think they were like 4th in the league or something like that. So I think it's just a misconception that they refuse to run the football. I mean, Nick Chubb is only like 160 yards away from the rushing title. So, I just don't think that Paul is the problem. I don't think he's the problem. I think the problem has been a number of things this year, but just in general, it's been the quarterback issue. So now they've got their quarterback. Let's see what everybody can do. Before we go lopping heads off, let's see what happens to this football team with Deshaun Watson at quarterback. And it's not always going to be beautiful, and it's not going to be easy in this division. I mean, this is a really, really good division full of really good quarterbacks. I'm going to be writing a little bit about that today. But I just don't think now is the time to be shaking things up too much, changing things up, talking about Kevin Stefanski being on the hot seat, which he's not, taking play calling away from him. Let's everybody chill out and see what the team can do with Deshaun at quarterback, because I'll tell you what, an elite quarterback covers up a lot of ills. Okay. You don't have to be perfect in every other area of the football team when you're throwing touchdown passes in the red zone and the end zone. You don't have to be so perfect on defense or special teams or whatever. Yeah,
it's kind of funny for all the talk of analytics and the Browns being this, they're this super smart team that do things differently. Like, it kind of all just comes down to you gave $230 million and gave up a bunch of draft picks to get a quarterback that of a caliber that never becomes available, that never hits the market.
Right.
So, I mean, there's nothing analytical about that. There's nothing like that's just, you know what? We've got the resources. We're going to go get this guy. So that's sort of the irony in all this analytics debate. But, I do think Paul DePodesta isn't free of criticism, but, he also hasn't been completely in control through all of this either. When John Dorsey came in and hired Freddie Kitchens, and Paul DePodesta was not running the show when John Dorsey was here as the GM. So those were a few lost years. Like you said, let's just see if this falls apart. If this doesn't go well next year, maybe even 8 games into next year, you're going to start to see things change. And, certainly we can talk about their draft process, and we can talk about some of their free agency choices and some things like that, and maybe what role Paul and some of what he does has played into some of those choices. But I don't think there should necessarily be a target on him right now. And I do also think analytics becomes like this boogeyman that people just kind of point at and blame, but it's really just information. That's all it is. It's just equipping people with as much information as possible and trying to make decisions based off of that.
Yeah. And if you look around the league right now, the name of the game is explosive passing games. That's what it's all about right now. And, maybe it will shift back towards more running the ball and supporting the pass with more of a running game. But right now, we all watched the playoffs from last year, and it was just high-flying, exciting, explosive offenses as we are taping this on Monday, the day after the Commanders game, we're about to watch Joe Burrow and Josh Allen play tonight. We watched Joe Burrow and Pat Mahomes go at it last year. We watched Josh and Pat. I mean, we're going to watch Justin Herbert in the playoffs this year. That's what it's all about. And the Browns knew that they had to go get that guy. And to think that you're not going to pass the ball a lot when you have Deshaun Watson, well, I mean, that's just crazy talk. But you brought up a good point about, Paul not being in control of a lot of things. That's very true. Because during those John Dorsey years, when Jimmy Haslam and the ownership group was erroneously trying to make John Dorsey and his group work with side by side with the analytics group and these two different clashing philosophies, that's when, John Dorsey added a lot of really good players to this football team, but he made a colossal mistake. I mean, he made one big, huge mistake. The number one thing that you have to get right in the year that you have the number one overall pick is you have to get the quarterback right. You have to get it right. Sashi got it wrong in 2017, and then John Dorsey came along and got it wrong in 2018. So back-to-back years of getting the quarterback wrong and screwing that up, and that is why the Browns had to go out and correct the mistake this past offseason. That's why they had to take the risk on Deshaun Watson. That's why they had to spend $230 million and also put their fan base and this city through the most controversial acquisition of a player ever, because they didn't get it right in 2017 and 2018, passing on Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, and Josh Allen. And, they're going to hopefully for them make up for it. But it didn't come without a price. But that, like you said, that was not all Paul DePodesta, because he was not calling the shots in 2018.
Yeah, and I mean, look, the Ravens are one of the most analytically driven organizations around. There's a lot of teams that maybe don't quite get the buzz that the Browns do, but they, there are some teams that have gigantic analytics departments, and they drive some of their decision making. Look, Paul will come under fire if things fall apart, because this is his organization right now, and he's he brought in Kevin, brought in Andrew, if this falls apart, it'll fall on him. But right now, I don't think there's a whole lot of reason to necessarily have Paul in the crosshairs. Let's do this. Let's take a break, and then I've got a few more questions here from our Football Insider subscribers.
NIL Now, a podcast dedicated to the name, image, and likeness of today's college and high school athletes.
NIL is not a cherry on top. It needs to be thought about as a part of these young men and women's future, as a nest egg for something when something goes wrong. There's less than 1% of these football players make it to the NFL. Their plan B is sometimes not as lofty as plan A. This NIL thing, when you ask what's the next important thing, is to make sure that these players are coming to school for education, sports, but also NIL is a close third in that. It's an investment into these players now that they can take advantage of or leverage their name, image, and likeness to, further their careers. So now you have a nest egg after you've invested so much time into your skill set in college. You should be able to leave college with something.
This is NIL Now.
And welcome back to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast, our Hey Mary Kay edition. Questions from our Football Insider subscribers. Let's get back to the defensive side of the ball. I think this is an interesting question. This comes from Ken Lieb in Westchester, Ohio. Hey Mary Kay, this question keeps popping up in my mind. The defense, notably the secondary, has performed well over the past few weeks. At the start of the season, they had people missing because of injury. They played a rookie at cornerback. However, it doesn't excuse the confusion and blown coverages over the first several games. So what Ken is wondering, he can't help but wonder if they don't play the starters enough during the preseason. Do you think that was an issue with the defense?
I'm not really sure about that. I guess you probably could play them a little bit more in the preseason. I don't know what the reason is necessarily for the slow start. There have been a lot of injuries and a lack of continuity on the defense. A lot of guys, like Denzel Ward, for instance, he didn't practice in training camp. I think training camp practices, in my mind, mean more than the preseason games per se. You know, if a guy misses a ton of training camp, generally it impacts him. That sets the foundation for the season. I've seen guys really struggle when they don't spend a ton of time in training camp because of injuries. And I think that's been the problem the last 2 years. I mean, when you look back to the previous year, there were guys all over standing on the sidelines in bucket hats with hamstring injuries. Remember that? And I think it leads to a slow start. And so I think that's what happened again this year. And then right off the bat, you lose your green sticker guy in Anthony Walker, who was off to a great start in this system at middle linebacker. And it just kind of spiraled from there. Guys that they thought were going to jump off the screen and the page right from the jump didn't do that. The Jordan Elliott's, the Jacob Phillips, the Grant Delpits. I mean, it took all of them a little while to get going. Denzel Ward off to a very slow start. I think in part because of the hamstring injury, and one thing just led to another. And I think that is why I would give Joe Woods another chance. I don't know if he'll get it, but I would give him another chance because I think he was trying to hold it together with smoke and mirrors at sometimes this season.
Yeah, preseason games aren't a great simulation of a regular season game, weirdly enough, because you might not be playing the starters on the other side. You might not, offenses aren't really testing you. They aren't really showing you anything because they don't want to put anything on tape. I guess there's a case to be made that it's something different and you're going to see some unexpected things. And you have to do a little bit of prep work for the game, I guess. So, yeah, I think I'm with you. I think it's more about getting really good work in training camp. And I don't know if Kevin will sort of change his approach in camp or not. They do a lot of, I guess, like his camp practices aren't like other camp practices I've seen. They're very, the pace is really good. You see what they want to get done and they get it done. But, maybe another competition period or something. I don't know. I don't know if he would change up his training camp practices to maybe kind of ramp guys up a little quicker. That's maybe something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and what they do love, now I don't love them, but the coaches love them, are those joint practices. They felt like they got so much out of those joint practices this year with the Eagles, and I'm sure they'll do it again this coming summer with the Eagles or someone else. But absolutely, they value those more than the preseason games because a lot of times those are just a recipe for somebody getting hurt, for back tier guys trying to make their mark. And so, we'll have to see. But I think the lack of continuity had more to do with injuries and guys kind of standing around on the sideline, not being able to play, and then them getting injured. I mean, when you look at it, so many guys missed a chunk of games, whether it was 3 or 4 or 5 games, or in some cases, most of the season. They just were not intact much of the year.
I will say those joint practices against the Eagles, I kind of regret that I didn't read more into them than I did because they kind of got out physicaled a little bit in those practices and they kind of got bullied by a team that has turned out to be really, really good. So, maybe they do carry a little meaning, at least for us watching on the outside. And are they supposed to practice with the Eagles again this year?
I think so, yeah.
Was that supposed to be a home and home? Or
yeah,
something?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's what they talked about, yes.
That would be another good test to go out there and go against them a couple of times, even though, like you said, I don't think the players love it. It does sort of increase your risk.
Yeah.
But they did Kevin and Nick Sirianni did do a pretty good job of guys taking care of each other. And it was never like, they weren't tackling to the ground. It never got super physical, or I don't think there were any fights or anything. They did a pretty good job of protecting guys.
Yeah, they did. I mean, it was very, very productive. They got really good work in, and I think they got way more out of those practices than they did out of the preseason games. And I expect them to do it again. And But again, like I said, more so than anything, I think it's going to be about hoping that they have guys that can practice more than they did this year. And it's going to be interesting to see because some guys are coming off of some surgeries, especially on your defense. I mean, you've got Sione Takitaki, ACL, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, potentially a foot surgery. So, we'll have to see who's going to be able to practice this year and who's not.
And you want to be careful too, because, as much as you want guys practicing, you also don't want a guy to push too hard and then you don't have him for a month at the start of the season. So it's a tricky balance, especially now, again, going back to having all this data and having all this information available to you to kind of protect guys. It can be a tricky balance to get guys out there. Okay, speaking of toughness, this comes from Bob Gillespie in Villa Hills, Kentucky. Hey, Mary Kay, after watching Pittsburgh beat Baltimore on Sunday night, the Steelers should be admired for their toughness and grit. Those are a couple of good AFC North terms. Do you see this week's game as a measure of the Browns' level of toughness and grit?
Well, one thing that we have seen in the past few weeks is that the Browns are playing really, really incredibly hard. What they might be missing a little bit of is a little bit of that nastiness. The AFC North is a little bit of a nasty division. Usually, it gets chippy on the field. It gets verbal in the week leading up to the games. These are really, really intense games. So we know that the Browns are going to play really hard. And yes, I think that in some respects, it will be a measure of that grit and that toughness. But I do think the Browns need to add an enforcer or two on defense. Somebody that's, just not all that nice. I mean, you know what I mean? Especially on the football field. Guys that have a little bit of an edge to them. So many of the Browns players are just those green sticker, and I mean different than the green sticker that's on the helmet. I mean what Eric Mangini used to call green sticker guys. Like when you're getting drafted, if you just have impeccable high character, you get the green sticker. And that's all well and good. But, every once in a while, you just need somebody that's just got that edge to them on defense. And I feel like they could possibly use one or two more of those guys. Maybe they can look for that quality in their defensive tackle. And I'm thinking of a guy you don't want anybody to cross over that line, but like an Ndamukong Suh, not him per se, but a guy like that has, a little bit of an edge to them. And you do have to keep an eye on them every once in a while to make sure they're not, just going outside the lines. But I feel like, when you look at the Steelers, when you look at the Ravens, when you look at, to the Bengals to a certain extent, there is just that little bit of, nastiness to them, and the Browns need a little bit more of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think they could use a little bit of edge, on their defense. They've been surprisingly, I don't want to say good, because they've gone 3-3 in both of Kevin's years in the AFC North. This year, if they beat the Steelers, they'll go 4-2. If they lose, they'll be 3-3 again. They've actually matched up weirdly well in the AFC North. Even these last two seasons that have been so disappointing, they've kind of matched. Some of that is you got to play Tyler Huntley last week, or not last week, but a couple weeks ago instead of Lamar Jackson. We see what that offense looks like with Huntley there. He played Mitch Trubisky in the first Steelers game, and we've seen Kenny Pickett kind of develop. Kenny's a little weird. He might struggle all game, but if he's within a score at the end, he's going to drive down and win it, which that's a pretty good trait to have. So yeah, I don't know. It's been strange how they've kind of matched, and we've talked about the Bengals up until the last time they played. It's weird how they've matched up relatively well with the AFC North, but I do kind of agree with you, and I agree with our texter. If you're going to tell me that this is going to be like a 13-10 just ugly game and say, okay, who's going to be the winner in that matchup, I would have to take the Steelers. I think they're just, for whatever reason, they're just built to win a gritty, ugly game like that.
Yeah, and they're going to be at home. They have so much on the line, so much to play for. It's going to be their first shot at Deshaun Watson. And, Deshaun has a tendency to hang on to the ball a little bit. So these guys are going to be, like sharks in the water. So yeah, I think it's going to be very, very intense. But the Browns match up well in the AFC North by design. I mean, they worked hard to make sure that they had answers for Lamar Jackson and what they do over there in Baltimore, and that they had answers for Joe Burrow and that band of receivers. So, they've worked very hard to be able to defensively to get to the quarterback, to cover receivers either in man or zone on the back end with a lot of really good defensive backs. So, there is a reason for that. And that's what you have to do. I mean, you have to build for that. And they have done that. But as you mentioned, they've gotten a few breaks along the way where they didn't have to face Joe Burrow twice last year. They did not have to face Lamar Jackson twice this year. And who knows, we might be saying the same thing about Kenny Pickett, that they caught a break by not having to face him twice as well. We'll see how that goes. But he's certainly heating up at the end of football games.
I think they definitely caught a break, not having to play Kenny Pickett. I think he's still kind of in that tier below the other guys. Well, I don't even want to say a tier, but he still has a lot to prove. But he's definitely shown some things, including Sunday night when he led that drive against the Ravens. Those are impressive things. Those are moments that stand out to you and make you think, hey, they might just have something here with this guy. Walter in Warren, Ohio. We'll end with this one. It's a depressing one for Browns fans. Hey, Mary Kay, let's say the Browns were 8-3 when Deshaun Watson came back. Let's give them the Jets win, the Falcons win, Chargers and Ravens. I don't know if that adds up, but 8-3 when he came back. How would you have felt about their chances in the playoffs as Deshaun Watson works off the rust?
Oh, at 8-3, I think it would. It would have been. That
would mean their defense had played pretty well all year too. Like you have to. So then you're feeling really good about things.
Oh yeah, at 8-3, I would have said it would be a no-brainer at that point. I think even at 6-5,
I think that he's kind of asking though, like how you would have felt had they made the how you would have felt they would have done had they made the playoffs. I think that's what.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think that's what he's getting at.
Okay.
I hope, because you're right. At 8-3, it's a no-brainer. They would have made the playoffs.
I would have felt really good about the Browns in the playoffs right now. I think the way the Browns are playing right now, when you look at Deshaun's connection with Amari Cooper, and then, there are times when, he and Donovan Peoples-Jones have really connected very well. David has been struggling a little bit lately for whatever reason, but Nick Chubb is still running like crazy. The offensive line is playing pretty well, although Jack Conklin might be out for this last game with an ankle injury, which you don't want that to happen when you've got TJ Watt across the line there. But, I think that this is a Cleveland Browns team that not many teams would have wanted to face, with Miles and Jadeveon and the secondary playing well and Deshaun. I would have felt very, very good about the Browns in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you'd expect them. I don't know that you'd expect them to go into Kansas City and win necessarily, but again, if they were 8-3, that means their defense was pretty good. Miles is probably having a great year. They'd have beaten a team like the Chargers and stuff already. So you'd at least go into that game with a chance. Same with, you'd feel like, okay, you have a chance to go there and win, whether you would pick it, whether it would actually happen or not. If they were good enough to get to 8-3 without Deshaun Watson, that would be a pretty good football team.
Yeah, it would be a really good football team. And as you mentioned, that would mean that the defense was doing its job and that the special teams was doing its job. And that's what didn't happen for most of this year. Those two units were a liability instead of an asset, didn't pull their weight and help Jacoby Brissett get those 6 victories that he needed to hand over to Deshaun Watson to keep the train rolling along.
Okay, well, that will do it for this edition of the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. All those questions came from our Football Insider subscribers, cleveland.com/Browns, the blue banner at the top of the page to get info about that and get signed up. You get a newsletter every day. You get access to exclusive stories on cleveland.com. And, of course, you become one of our texters. And subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and check us out on YouTube. It's just an audio version of the pod, but if you prefer hanging out on YouTube and listening there, just search for Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com, and you'll find our Browns YouTube channel. And we do stand-ups after every practice. We do practice videos, press conference videos. There's lots of stuff there, too, just besides podcasts. So join we got a bunch of subscribers on that page, so join the crew over there as well. Mary Kay, I'll talk to you later.
Sounds great.